I still remember the sound of the tires screeching. 1 second, I was driving home with my newborn daughter asleep in the back seat. The next, everything became a blur of shattered glass, twisting metal, and unbearable pain. Even now, at 33 years old, that moment haunts me more than any nightmare ever could. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. Which country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if stories about family betrayal, justice, and emotional victories interest you, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happened next. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how the people who were supposed to love me the most abandoned me when I needed them most. Growing up, I was never the favorite child. That title belonged to my younger brother, Ryan. My parents practically worshipped him. If he made a mistake, they excused it. If I achieved something important, they barely noticed. For years, I tried to earn their approval. I graduated college with honors, built a successful career, and worked harder than anyone I knew. But no matter what I accomplished, it was never enough. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I secretly hoped things would change. I thought maybe becoming grandparents would soften their hearts. I was wrong. From the moment I announced my pregnancy, my parents acted distant. They complained about having to attend baby showers. They rarely called to check on me. When I asked if they were excited to meet their granddaughter, they would change the subject. It hurt more than I can describe. Still, I convinced myself that once the baby arrived, everything would be different. Then my daughter Sophie was born. The first time I held her, I felt a kind of love I had never experienced before. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, tiny nose, tiny heartbeat resting against my chest. I promised her that no matter what happened, I would always protect her. I had no idea how quickly that promise would be tested. Just 2 weeks after bringing Sophie home, I was driving back from a pediatric appointment when another vehicle ran a red light. The crash happened so fast that I never had time to react. When I woke up in the hospital hours later, every part of my body hurt. But there was only one thing I cared about. My baby. I tried to sit up and ask the nurse where Sophie was. The expression on her face instantly filled me with fear, and what she told me next made my blood run cold. The expression on the nurse's face instantly filled me with fear. And what she told me next made my blood run cold. "Your daughter is safe," she said gently. The relief hit me so hard that I almost started crying. But then I noticed she wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to know." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" I asked. The nurse exchanged a glance with another staff member before speaking. "After the accident, because you were unconscious, the hospital contacted your emergency contacts, my parents." I immediately knew she was talking about my parents. "They came?" I asked. The nurse hesitated. "Yes, they came." Something about her tone made my heart sink. "Where's Sophie now?" I asked. The room suddenly felt smaller. The nurse took a slow breath. "Your parents refused to take temporary responsibility for her." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood. "What?" "They said they weren't willing to care for the baby while you were receiving treatment." I stared at her. "No, that can't be right." The nurse looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I'm sorry." My chest felt like it was collapsing. My parents wouldn't do that, but deep down, a painful voice inside me whispered that they absolutely would. The nurse continued carefully. "They stayed for less than 20 minutes. I couldn't believe what I was hearing." "What exactly did they say?" She looked reluctant to answer. Then she quietly replied, "Your father said he wasn't interested in raising another child." The words hit me like another collision. My father, the same man who spent years telling everyone how important family was, the same man who constantly lectured me about responsibility. My hands began shaking, and my mother... The nurse looked away for a moment. She said the baby wasn't her problem. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Not her problem. Her own granddaughter. A newborn baby. Not her problem. I turned my face toward the wall because I couldn't stop crying. All my life, I had tried to earn their love. I had excused every cruel comment, every ignored birthday, every broken promise, every moment they chose Ryan over me. And now, when their granddaughter needed someone for a few hours, they walked away. The nurse placed a hand on my shoulder. There was one positive thing. I looked back at her. What? A social worker stayed with your daughter the entire time. I nodded slowly. At least someone cared. At least a stranger had shown more compassion than my own parents. The next few hours felt endless. Doctors came in and out. I had a fractured arm, several broken ribs, and a serious concussion. The pain was terrible. But nothing hurt more than knowing my baby had been left without family. I kept asking when I could see Sophie. Unfortunately, because of my condition, the doctors wanted me under observation. Every minute felt like torture. Then my phone started vibrating. Ryan, of course, my brother, the family favorite. I almost ignored the call, but eventually I answered. Emily, he said casually. Not worried, not concerned. Casual. You really caused a mess. I couldn't believe my ears. A mess? Mom and Dad are upset. The hospital kept calling them. I stared at the phone. Are you serious right now? What? They refused to help my daughter. Ryan sighed dramatically. Well, they're older now. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. They're in their early 60s, so they could have stayed with their granddaughter for a few hours. Ryan became quiet. Then he said something that made my blood boil. Look, Emily, nobody asked you to have a baby. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. The room felt silent, cold, empty. Then I hung up. I was done listening, done defending myself, done pretending this family cared about me. For the first time in my life, something inside me started changing. The desperate little girl who wanted her parents' approval was disappearing, and in her place was a mother who would do anything to protect her child. Hours passed. The sun began setting outside my hospital window. The hallway grew quieter. Visitors came and went, still no sign of anyone from my family. No flowers, no apology, no concern, nothing. I remember staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was finally the moment. I accepted the truth. Maybe I'd never really mattered to them. Maybe Sophie never would either. The realization broke my heart. Then, just as I was wiping tears from my face, I heard movement outside my room. Heavy footsteps. Purposeful footsteps. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Confident. A second later, the door opened. I turned my head toward the entrance, and standing there was the last person I expected to see, my grandfather. But the look on his face told me he already knew exactly what my parents had done, and judging by the fury in his eyes, someone was about to be held accountable. My grandfather stood in the doorway, gripping his cane so tightly that his knuckles looked white. I had never seen that expression on his face before, not even when family members argued, not even during the hardest times of our lives. This was different. This was anger, real anger. The moment he saw me lying in that hospital bed, bruised and hooked up to machines, his eyes softened. Emily, he said quietly. That was all it took. I burst into tears. Within seconds, he was sitting beside me, holding my hand. You're okay, he said. I've got you. Those 4 words meant more to me than he could ever know, because for the first time since the accident, I felt safe. Grandpa, I whispered. Sophie? She's safe. I immediately exhaled. She's safe, sweetheart. Then his expression darkened again. And I know exactly what your parents did. The room became silent. I looked down. Part of me still felt embarrassed, humiliated, like somehow their behavior reflected on me. But Grandpa wasn't having it. Look at me. I raised my eyes. What they did is shameful. Not you. Fresh tears filled my eyes. All my life, I had wanted someone in my family to say those words. Someone to acknowledge the truth. Someone to admit I wasn't the problem. Grandpa squeezed my hand. Do you know who called me? I shook my head. The hospital social worker. That surprised me. She couldn't believe what happened. Apparently, after my parents left, the social worker became concerned and started reviewing emergency contacts again. When she saw Grandpa's name listed as an alternate contact, she called him. The moment he learned what had happened, he drove straight to the hospital. Do you know what your father told the staff? Grandpa asked. I slowly shook my head. His jaw tightened. He said he wasn't. Wasting his retirement years taking care of somebody else's responsibility. The words made me sick. Somebody else's responsibility. As if Sophie weren't his granddaughter. As if I weren't his daughter. Grandpa looked disgusted. And your mother agreed. I closed my eyes. The betrayal still hurt, but now it felt different. Less shocking. More final. Like a door had finally closed. Grandpa stayed with me for over an hour. Then he stood up. Where are you going? I asked. A cold smile crossed his face. To handle something. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. The next morning, I was finally allowed to see Sophie. A nurse carefully wheeled her bassinet into my room. The second I saw her tiny face, I started crying again. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, completely unaware of the chaos surrounding her. I gently touched her little hand. And in that moment, I made a promise. No matter what happened next, I would never allow anyone to make her feel unwanted. Especially not my parents. Later that afternoon, Grandpa returned. But he wasn't alone. He had an attorney with him, an actual attorney. I stared in confusion. Grandpa? The attorney smiled politely. Nice to meet you, Emily. What is this? Grandpa pulled up a chair. Then he dropped a bombshell. I'm changing my estate plans. My eyes widened. What? You heard me. I blinked. Why? He looked genuinely surprised by the question. Because I finally see people for who they are. I didn't know what to say. For years, everyone assumed Grandpa's estate would eventually be divided mostly between my father and Ryan. Our family wasn't wealthy beyond imagination, but Grandpa had done extremely well throughout his life. He owned multiple properties, investments, land, savings. The inheritance was substantial. Your father and brother have spent years counting money they haven't earned, Grandpa said. The attorney nodded. And after yesterday, I've had enough. I stared at him. Grandpa, you don't need to do that. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. For years, I've watched how they treated you. That caught me off guard. You knew? He laughed bitterly. Emily, everyone knew. The words hit me hard. Everyone knew. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew I was treated differently. The realization was painful, but strangely validating. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overly sensitive. I wasn't dramatic. It had been real all along. Grandpa continued. I stayed quiet longer than I should have. His voice carried genuine regret, but yesterday changed everything. Then he leaned forward. When your parents abandoned that baby, they revealed exactly who they are. I looked at Sophie sleeping beside me. My chest tightened. The attorney opened a folder. Several documents were inside. Legal documents. Official documents. Grandpa has instructed us to revise certain arrangements immediately. I still couldn't process everything. Meanwhile, across town, my parents had no idea what was happening. At least not yet. That changed 2 days later. Because somehow news reached them, and suddenly they started calling, constantly. My phone exploded with messages. Mom, call me. Dad, we need to talk. Ryan, what did you tell Grandpa? I ignored every message. For once, I wasn't interested in explaining myself. Then my mother showed up at the hospital. The same mother who said my baby wasn't her problem. She walked into my room carrying flowers. Flowers. As if flowers could erase what happened. Emily, she said sweetly. The fake concern in her voice was almost insulting. I stared at her silently. How are you feeling? I didn't answer. Her eyes shifted towards Sophie. Oh my goodness. She's beautiful. The sudden affection made my stomach turn. 2 days ago, she didn't want responsibility. Now she wanted grandmother privileges. Interesting. Why are you here? I asked. Her smile faded. I came to see my daughter. No. Her eyebrows lifted. No. You came because of Grandpa. The silence that followed told me everything. I had guessed correctly. She shifted uncomfortably. That's ridiculous. Is it? Emily, did you come when I was unconscious? Her face tightened. I already knew the answer. Yes. Did you leave? She didn't answer. Did you refuse, Sophie? Still silence. That silence said more than words ever could. I looked directly at her. Get out! Her eyes widened. Excuse me? You heard me. Emily, don't be dramatic. Dramatic. I almost laughed. After everything that happened, she was still using the same old tactics. Dismiss. Minimize. Blame. Control. But they weren't working anymore. Leave. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her reaction. And she knew it. Because something in her expression changed. She realized she was losing control. She realized I wasn't begging for love anymore, and that terrified her. She left without another word. But the real explosion came later that evening, because while my mother was trying to repair appearances, Grandpa was preparing to reveal something that would shake the entire family, something that would turn years of favoritism upside down. And when my father and Ryan finally learned what Grandpa had decided to do with his fortune, their panic would be impossible to hide. But that wasn't even the most satisfying part, because Grandpa had one final move planned. A move none of us saw coming, and it was about to change everything. The next morning, the entire family was summoned to Grandpa's house. No one knew exactly why, but everyone had heard rumors. And, judging by the panic in my father's voice during the messages he kept sending me, he already suspected something was wrong. Very wrong. A week had passed since the accident. I was still recovering, but I was finally discharged from the hospital. Grandpa insisted on driving me and Sophie to his house himself. The entire ride there he barely spoke, but there was something different about him. He looked calm, confident, like a man who had already made his decision and wasn't interested in changing it. When we arrived, my parents and Ryan were already there. The atmosphere was tense. Nobody smiled. Nobody greeted me. Nobody asked how I was recovering. Not a single person asked how Sophie was doing. That told me everything I needed to know. My father immediately approached Grandpa. Dad, what is all this about? Grandpa ignored him. Instead, he walked into the living room and sat down. His attorney was already waiting there. Several folders sat neatly on the table. The moment my father saw the attorney, the color drained from his face. Ryan looked nervous too. Grandpa slowly looked around the room. Then he spoke. I spent the last week thinking about family. Nobody said a word. I spent the last week thinking about character. Still silence. And I spent the last week deciding who deserves to be part of my legacy. My mother's eyes widened. My father shifted uncomfortably. Ryan swallowed hard. They all knew where this was going. They just didn't want to hear it. Grandpa looked directly at my father. When your daughter was unconscious after a car accident, what did you do? My father immediately became defensive. Dad, we've already discussed this. No, answer the question. The room became quiet. Finally, my father muttered I couldn't take care of a newborn. Grandpa's expression hardened. You wouldn't take care of a newborn. The distinction hit like a hammer. My father had no response. Then Grandpa turned toward my mother. And what did you say about Sophie? My mother looked embarrassed. I was stressed. That wasn't my question. She looked away. Finally, she whispered, I said she wasn't my responsibility. The words sounded even worse when spoken aloud. The room fell silent. Then Grandpa pointed toward Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside me. That baby is your granddaughter. Neither of them answered. Emily was lying in a hospital bed, unable to protect her child. Still silence. And you abandoned both of them. My father stood up. That's not fair. Grandpa slammed his cane against the floor. The sound echoed through the room. Fair? Nobody had ever spoken to my father like that before. Do you want to discuss fairness? My father immediately sat back down. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Grandpa then looked toward the attorney. Please proceed. The attorney opened the folder. My heart started racing. So that there is no confusion, the attorney began. Mr. Harrison has officially revised his estate plan. The room became completely silent. My father looked frozen. Ryan looked terrified. My mother gripped the arm of her chair. The attorney continued. Several beneficiaries have been removed. My father's jaw tightened. Removed? He asked. The attorney nodded. Yes. Who? The attorney calmly looked down at the document. You and Ryan. The room exploded. What? Ryan shouted. This is insane. My father yelled. My mother immediately started crying. But Grandpa didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't apologize. For the first time, they couldn't manipulate him. The attorney continued reading. The majority of the estate will instead be placed into a trust benefiting Emily and her daughter Sophie. The silence afterward was almost unbelievable. Ryan looked like he had been punched. My father looked furious, and my mother looked completely stunned. Years! They had spent years assuming that money belonged to them. Years counting an inheritance that wasn't even theirs yet. And in a single moment, everything changed. You can't do this, Ryan shouted. Grandpa laughed, actually laughed. Yes, I can. The attorney nodded. Legally, he absolutely can. Ryan's face turned red. My father stood up again. Dad, she's turning you against us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even now, even after everything, they still blamed me. Grandpa slowly stood. No. His voice was calm. Your actions turned me against you. Nobody could argue with that, because it was true. Then Grandpa revealed something none of us expected. Something that left the entire room speechless. A few days after the accident, he had requested copies of the hospital reports and statements from staff members. Every conversation, every witness statement, every documented interaction. You wanted proof. And he got it. The attorney placed those documents on the table. There it was, in black and white, recorded evidence of exactly what my parents had said about Sophie, exactly what they had said about me. I couldn't deny it anymore. They couldn't rewrite history. They couldn't pretend they were victims. The truth was sitting right in front of everyone. My mother broke down crying. My father looked defeated. Ryan sat silently, staring at the floor. For the first time, consequences had finally arrived. Real consequences. Not because of revenge, because of accountability. A few months later, my life looked completely different. I continued healing. Sophie grew stronger every day, and Grandpa became the most loving great-grandfather imaginable. The funny thing is that losing my parents, approval ended up being one of the most freeing experiences of my life. For years, I chased people who never truly valued me. Now, I didn't have to. I finally understood something important. Family isn't defined by blood. Family is defined by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. And when my world collapsed after that accident, my parents walked away, but Grandpa walked in. He chose me. He chose Sophie. And that changed everything. My parents eventually tried reaching out again, but things were never the same. Some wounds heal. Others become reminders. Reminders of who people really are when nobody is watching. As for Grandpa, he lived long enough to watch Sophie take her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, and every single time she ran into his arms, I saw pure happiness on his face. That was the justice I cared about most. Not the money, not the inheritance, not the family drama. The real victory was knowing that my daughter grew up surrounded by genuine love. the kind of love my parents never gave me. And that's how the story ended. The day my parents abandoned my newborn was the day they lost something far more valuable than money. They lost their place in our lives. And the man they thought would always support them chose the people they had abandoned instead. If you're still watching, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional revenge and justice stories. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.